Welcome back, Star Wars fans. This is the Star Wars Universe Podcast, and myself and Ashley Coffin are here to talk about The Mandalorian, Season 3, Episode 3. All that and more after commercial break we have no control over. Welcome back. I'm Matthew Fox, your host. I'm joined, as always, for all things Mandalorian by Ashley Coffin. Ashley, what do we think of this episode?
I liked it. I loved parts of it. I liked other parts of it. It was a much longer episode than the others, which was fun. But I'm very partial to the action, and I thought that the beginning sequence was really amazing. And then it just kind of, I don't know other word, but like blue ball me over to this slow story. I was like, oh, which did pick up and ended up being really, really interesting. But I'm glad that we jumped back to where we left off. I thought we weren't going to do that.
Yeah, I feel like they did a good job because, I absolutely loved every single minute of Dr. Pershing and his journey and just getting to explore like what happened to what happened to the people who are in the Empire, how are they settling in, how is this all working? But it was slow. It was
a little slow.
A couple things I read said this is the Andorification of Mandalorian. And I'm here for it. But I think if we had just gotten that for a full episode, I and 6 other people would have loved it. And I think most people, for good reason, would have been like, where's Mando? Yeah. And so I am glad that we get this awesome action scene at the beginning that also pays off a lot of Mando's story with Bo-Katan, and then some of that at the end with this kind of like deep look at the crime and punishment system of the New Republic in the middle.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because, you're seeing the dark side of what the Republic is doing with, brain scrambling and things like that. And that's not very good. But, it's hard to look at situations like this and think of, okay, it's good. They're trying to reintegrate people who worked for the Empire who, were not Sith lords and evil and get them back into society. And it didn't look like a horrible place to live. But it is interesting that we even went there. I kind of loved that we're exploring this whole like deep side story of what's going on in Star Wars. Like, I don't think I'd ever see something like that. And I just thought it was really cool.
That makes sense. That makes total sense. So first of all, I do think it's awesome. And let's kind of just start with that first part of Din and Bo-Katan.
Oh my God.
We pick up right after they have been in the waters. And first of all, we learned something that there was some internet debate about. And my friend Danielle, written the Star Wars, turns out she was right. He did just fall. There was no like...
Ken was like, something grabbed him. I'm like, I don't think so.
And Bo-Katan says it's because there was some kind of seismic activity and she doesn't know. I'm a little disappointed by that, because what I would have loved is if, like, after all of his, I know the way, I know the creed, I know true Mandalore, she'd been like, okay, do you know that there's the 30-foot drop after you? Oh, no, you didn't. Oh, well. But
great.
Either way, we get that. And I really love the way their relationship is developing. She has this great line of, okay, I acknowledge that you have bathed in the waters. I validate, I witness that you are redeemed. Can we go now?
Yeah. And I'm like, you did too.
Yeah. Which will come up for sure.
I do wish that she told him about them, that she saw the creature.
Yeah. Why do you think because clearly she was asking about it when she's saying like, did you see anything living down there? Why do you think she held back?
Maybe she didn't want to feed into what he's already believing so hard in. Maybe just holding that back a little bit by, for her, that was probably a big deal.
Yeah.
But she still doesn't want to feed into the whole other side of it.
Right. Yeah, I can see it going in a bunch of ways. I think that's definitely a thing that could be there. Part of me thinks that she's already a little sensitive, that like he doesn't take her seriously as a Mandalorian.
Mm-hmm.
And so he might kind of be like, oh, come on, no. Like he might like think she's crazy for thinking that. Forgive me for using that word, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I also think the flip side of it could be, like, there's a lot of myths in the Mandalorians about, like, in the same way that, like, this person who shalt wield the Darksaber, shalt be the ruler, I'm using the kind of yeah. Anyway, um, but that also there's some talk about like the person who could ride a mythosaur. Like I think I don't think it was that like that's a prediction of who will rule. It's that when there were mythosaurs, the Mando, the person who would lead the Mandalorians, I think he's actually called the Mandalore, that person would ride a mythosaur. So I also don't know if maybe this is her like, well, I didn't get the saber, but I don't want to tell. If I tell him about the mythosaur, he's gonna ride the damn mythosaur because he's got main character syndrome. So I need to keep that to myself, and just I want to be the one to ride it.
Oh, well, that's interesting. I forget how Dune Star Wars is sometimes. There's things I don't know, but
really
that
is
is very interesting. Like I wouldn't have thought that to be, a reasoning why. But yeah, I mean, Sis needs to keep some cards in her pocket.
Right? Yeah, I think it's fair. I think it's fair. I do also appreciate that although she's kind of making fun, not even making fun of him, but she kind of has an exasperated, like, come on, Dad, you did the thing, let's go.
Mm-hmm.
When she says, like, can we go now? There is the moment where she talks about, her family and how they died, fighting protect Mandalore. And Din responds, this is the way. And she responds, this is the way. And it felt like a moment where if this was the two of them last season or even the beginning of this season, I think she would have been like, come on, don't use that the way stuff. This is a serious thing. I think here she was like, no, I get that this is his way of showing respect for what I'm talking about, and I'm going to give that back.
Yeah, I feel like they are finally born, like have a little bond, and I really like it. Like I was worried for her during the fight. I was like, they're not gonna, because her story, this is past her story in anything, right? Everybody's kind of like past their stories. So I was super worried for some reason. Because I just I can't wait to see, especially where we end up in this episode, where we're going with her. Because I mean, when you have nothing, maybe even the cult sounds fun.
yeah. It's a thing. I think where she goes there is gonna be really fun. So let's talk about that fight scene. What'd you love about it?
So I love the planes and the just the way that the TIE destroyers, you said?
TIE interceptors.
TIE interceptors, which is new to me, but they still obviously can't shoot because, as usual, they're right behind them through every scene, and they never hit them once, which is just amazing at this point. But I don't know. They just that looked like Ireland, like Northern Ireland backsetting, and they're just flying around. It was everything my little action heart loved and needed.
Yeah. One thing I loved, and this is a dumb nitpick, but one thing that, outer space is fundamentally different than in an atmosphere, and vehicles travel differently. And so all of the kind of like banking turns and things like that you do in most Star Wars, that doesn't actually make any sense in outer space. And that's part of why Battlestar Galactica was so good in that it was one of the first to be like, I mean, Babylon 5 was also one of the first to show like, no, this is how ships would actually, move in space. And here, so they were like, no, okay, if we're going to do that, then let's do it in an atmosphere. Now we're much more like fighter jets. This is Top Gun. It's not science fiction.
Well, doesn't the Millennium Falcon do that all the time?
Yeah. And again, they're having them do it more in atmospheres now, which is awesome. Because, when it does it in Empire, it looks phenomenal, but it makes no sense physics-wise.
No, don't think about physics. We're talking about Star Wars. What are you doing?
Exactly. But yeah, so many of the things from the like dropping him so that he like them going back so that he can get into a ship so that he can join the fight. When she said that, I thought that was ridiculous, but they made it work so well with him with the jetpack and all.
I got nervous even in that point. I was like, no, watch out for the castle, because they were shooting at him. And then when they came back around and just demolished it, I was like, oh no, oh no.
It was awful. And I think it also really showed how alone she was, because you're sort of like, well, aren't any of her people left? Aren't there some like, air defense weapons or like other people in
what
ships
happened to her
that can...
friends?
Yeah, I mean, she said that they all left when she couldn't bring back the Darksaber, and I thought in a small way that moment really drove that home.
It's just a shame because the Mandalorians with her at the last episode of Mandalorian season 2 seemed so on her side, and I mean they saw what happened, but they still seemed like they stuck by her. So I I don't know. I just wish there was a little bit more dialogue on exactly why,
Yeah.
just, oh, I didn't have the dark saber anymore. So then why aren't they all going after Din to be like, well, you're our leader now, lead us.
Yeah. My hope is that that those folks who were with her, they haven't turned their back on her. They're just like, well, we don't want to go live on an abandoned moon in that spooky old castle with you, but we're going to hang out over here where there's like, stuff to do. But when you need us again, just call us. And she just like, they were too far away for them to come join this battle in time.
I like
That's
that.
my
I
hope.
like that narrative.
Yeah. So we'll see. We'll see. All right. So anything else on that battle scene before we move into, all right. So let's talk about amnesty programs. I know this was kind of slow for you. What do you think, though, of the overall story we got?
I think by the time we got to the end of where we were going, I realized what they were doing and I was more on board. But
Yeah.
for them to just stop and I'm like, oh, I know I remember this character and the things that he was doing in the previous season, but I didn't have such a connection with him to understand immediately what was going on and like the things he was
Right.
talking for. But then, the cloning stuff and the Republic Bandit. So it was interesting to just see them trying to, the female character trying to trick him because we knew that she is no good.
Yeah. Well, she's Elia Kane, communications officer. And yeah, she was on Moff Gideon's ship with him. He had been taken prisoner a while before, but we knew that she was with Moff Gideon. And I thought they played that out so well because if you were thinking the whole time that she was bad, then you're a lot more ahead of me because I was honestly not sure. Well, I thought it was going to go one of three ways. One, that she was honestly trying to help him, although they did some kind of music that made me think, okay, she's not entirely, on the up and up. And she was leading him by the nose and I felt so bad for him, but also like, dude, you're getting so manipulated. Or I thought at first she might just be a narc. And this might just whole thing be a like really kind of, not great entrapment style, a trap, a narc situation, which it does turn out to be true. But then there's that third level of, no, it does seem that she's probably doing something a lot more shady when she turns the dial all the way up on that it's really not a mind flayer, we promise device.
We promise. I did it too. I'm great. Like, what? Yeah. Republic? What are you doing?
Yeah, I want to talk about his story, but just what'd you think of what the Republic was doing with this whole thing with the former Empire people? Because it not great.
No, it's not great. It's not great. And at the same time, I also don't know what you do to make sure that these people are not still trying to take down the Republic, which unfortunately Dr. Penpusher was not trying to, but the cloning thing's not great. Maybe we shouldn't do that. And I really did love the way that he tricked the robot into telling him it was okay. Smart people. I love smart people.
If there's anything that this episode proved to me, it's that there is going around right now, especially in like huge corporations, where they're like, why don't we just build AIs and those can be the counselors for our workers, and that way we don't have to hire therapists. And if ever an episode did a perfect job of explaining why AI therapy is a terrible idea, like you could see how upset he was, but of course the robot couldn't sense that in any way. The droid couldn't sense it, and it was just not a fan. Like you, I get where the New Republic is coming from. I think a lot of what they're doing is a good thing. I think the idea is a rehabilitation. I think giving him a chance to give this talk about like the work he was doing and why it was important is great. The first thing that made me really kind of like perk my ears up about here's a problem. First was that when they gave him that little badge that helps him find others like him, but also lets everybody, it's kind of like the pink triangle, lets everyone know like he's the bad one, and you see people reacting to it. But it was also when all of them introduced themselves to each other by their numbers.
Right? I was like, stop calling me by my number. I have a name. Why are we doing this?
Yeah. And she has this moment that feel like, at first I was like, is that just because they're former Empire and that's what they're used to? But no, like they have names. People called him called him Dr. Pershing beforehand. And and yeah, and the fact that it felt so transgressive, and like she's making a real connection uh when Elia told him her name and said, "I'm Elia Kane, communications officer." It was just like, oh, it hit so home that like I get where he was coming from, you know?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, and I also saw right through her manipulations.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Little evil.
Did you know that from the beginning that she was the one who left those biscuits?
Oh yeah. Because he said he
Yeah.
liked the biscuits, right?
Yeah.
It was something along those lines, and of course she would get them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was onto
Yeah.
her from the second she had a triangle of
Mm-hmm.
sadness between her brow.
Yeah.
I was like,
I
oh,
want
he knows you.
I wanted her to not be terrible, but yeah, there it was. And it's funny because the way he talks, like when I stop and think about it and I realize, yeah, given everything that's been done with it and all the potential harms, shutting down cloning is probably the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
But what he says about like, helping parents to craft a child that's the genetic material of both of them, he says the best of both of them. And so that's like, eugenics. But also I've worked with enough couples dealing with infertility to some extent who would kill for that kind of technology.
Yeah.
And I feel like I do come down at the end of like, no, it's probably the right thing to shut it all down. And certainly let's not trust the Imperial guy to do it. But I at least 100% believe that he thinks he is doing the right thing.
Yeah, and that's the reason that he's in the situation that he is because he does think he's doing the right thing. And
Yeah.
no matter what, if we had that kind of technology, someone's going to use it for bad. And it's
Yeah.
probably going to be worse than any good that it can do.
Yeah.
And it's a really hard thing to think about and say, but those are the things that we have to shut down. And unfortunately, I don't feel like our society and scientists will do that if we ever get to that technology point.
Yeah. I think you're right.
They're
I think you're right.
Rich people are already cloning their dogs and stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's just such a mess. And I just love though the way that it's shown. Like I'm always in love with the story of like what happens when a rebellion has to rule,
Mhm.
that idea of like, fighting is easy, but ruling is harder. And so just seeing how quickly the bureaucracy has hit, because that
Yeah.
one guy who maybe he could have some decision making power, maybe he isn't, but he's not saying like, I agree with this decision or I disagree. He's just saying, well, you have to file this form and then that form. And it's just the like, I'm captured by the bureaucracy. There's no
Yeah.
actual engagement with should this be done or not.
Yeah, and I mean, it goes down to every little thing that we go through as a society. And when you throw the
Mhm.
Star Wars things over, it can be really easy to just use that to see things in a different perspective, but it's not too different from where we're at now, which is crazy to say because we never
Yeah.
think we'd be in a weird future like this where these things are possible.
I mean, again, to think about like the way people can take like a lot of propaganda is taking an idea that sounds reasonable and then using it to justify the unreasonable. And so when she says to him in terms of like why maybe he should go against the orders to not touch cloning, and she says, and this is the quote, following orders blindly is how we got in trouble in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that hit me so hard because like, yeah, like, I was just following orders like ever since Nuremberg we've accepted is not a defense. Like you have a moral obligation to refuse to follow an order that to be inhumane, to be wrong. And so the way she uses that, I think that to me was more than anything where I was like, I had the manipulation sense that you did, but I wanted to believe, but that where I was like, oh no, this person's up to no good.
No good. I was
Yeah.
like, it was from the beginning shot when they showed her in her little Imperial outfit. I was like, nope. No.
Yep.
And thank goodness for the previously on this week because it did help me a lot.
Yeah. The other thing that I really loved was that first scene at the party, right after he's given that speech, because first, it's a small little thing, but I hate when you're at parties like that and you're having an interesting conversation with one person and a new person comes in and just is like that's the time where it is completely okay to interrupt whatever conversation was happening and be like, no, now you're going to talk about my thing.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so watching him not like bathe in the adoration, but keep trying to go back to the first person he was speaking with was so good.
and all
then,
those people were horrible.
Oh, they were. And it was such that Andor moment of we try not to get involved. You know, in
Mhm.
this galactic empire, rebellion, New Republic, who can tell the difference? Like, one was blowing up planets and one wasn't. I think I can
Right.
tell the difference, but
I guess you didn't even have to pay attention.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. Nice little bit of social commentary there.
I
So,
actually really liked the scene where she took him to the center, like of the botanical. That wasn't the botanical garden, whatever it was with the rock that was on
oh,
Coruscant,
yeah.
because Coruscant is just this gorgeous city. It reminds me of like the Fifth Element, and I'm like, gosh, if that's what the future looks like, I would really like to see it.
Yeah.
But to have that rock there, and this is the only part of the planet that's still a piece of nature. Is I
Hmm.
don't know why. I just thought that was really cool.
It really was. I think it's been mentioned in books, but I think that's the first time it's ever been seen on screen. And it's such a
Mm.
nice idea. And as someone who grew up in New York City, you'd think that I'd want that. I've come to find that like being under a tree every now and then is kind of nice too. And so the idea that the only piece of like nature that's still there is this dead rock with nothing growing on it got to me a bit. But yeah, it was a nice kind of little moment, and also how much he would respond to it. And then the way she pranks him
I
in terms of
know.
like, who said there's no sign, you know? It's like on the one hand, I feel like that's a good way to convince him not to trust his instincts. So it's
Right?
kind of like she's taking a big risk there, but I think in the end it works because I think it gets him to like, you know, she's teasing him a little bit, but I think it gets him to be like, "Oh, okay, that's fine. That's fine. I'll just listen to you going forward."
Yeah. I remember when we were in Rome and I thought I could take my gelato down and sit on the corner of the Trevi fountain and eat it. It was
Uh-huh.
very much like that scene. It was just whistles. It was two people blowing whistles in my face, yelling
Oh,
at me in
wow.
Italian. And I was like, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? And it was like, no, you can't. And I was like, oh, okay, I'll take one foot this way and I'll sit on this. Oh, I didn't know. I didn't know. So I it
Yeah.
really, that scene made me laugh. I was like, oh, I'm triggered.
Yeah, it's hard being a tourist, you know?
Yeah.
Like it's hard.
Well, speaking of tourists, them sneaking out of that place, I was so frustrated with him the entire time. I'm like, this is how I knew that she was bad because you wouldn't take the one person who looks more guilty than anyone you've ever met to try to
Yeah.
sneak out of somewhere and to risk that. It's like
Yeah.
you knew you had to have something in your pocket to risk going out with this guy who looks at every person he walks by in the eye with this like worried
Mhm.
face. I'm like, what are you doing? What's
I I
happening?
think I think the idea was that he would be the only one to know what they needed to steal and what they needed to take with them. Because you're right, or else it makes no sense. You know, like there's that great moment when she does it to connect with the alien, and then later he says, you know, Tog's days, am I right? At such the worst time. And like you're like, oh god, yeah, like he's not a covert agent. He's really, really not.
It's really not. You're risking a lot to do this. So you must
Hmm.
have some kind of safety net.
Yeah, definitely. And just I mentioned the word entrapment before, but I just want to say it again. Like it's to me another mark against the New Republic, and also how little trust they have for these former Imperials. Because
Mm.
you know, in it, I mean, I don't know what the court system on Coruscant is like, and maybe that's the point. But you know, in every court system I know, if someone comes to you and says, "Hey, do you want to commit this crime with me?" and you say yes, and then they arrest you, that's entrapment. Like the law's not supposed to work like that.
Right.
And granted, it happens on our own world all the time because hey, policing's not always the best. But the fact that like even like the Admiral Akbar guy, the Calamari, who was just like, "Nope, it's okay, everything happened," and as we know, he got like mini mind flayed
Right.
and he's not listening to him in the slightest. It was just like, oof, yeah. And
He
like, 'cause there's
did
no
for a second though, because when he said you tricked me, I noticed that he like stopped and looked over
right,
at the girl. So I
yeah,
was like, oh, but it wasn't enough.
yeah, because there's no trial, there's no like
No.
process of like, let's hear the evidence. It's just, nope, he got caught, so let's do the mind thing to him. And I mean, honestly, the happy-go-lucky attitude that the other guy has, I think, is a pretty good sign of this is mind control of some kind. It is
Hmm.
some kind of like, you know,
And
mind.
who's in charge of this? Who signed off on this? Like who's doing this in the
Yep.
Republic? I got questions.
Yeah. Because they do at least, I think part of what they show at the end, though, is that the Republic is doing it at a much lower level, and then it still has horrifying effects, but it's
Right.
nowhere near as bad as the full personality wipe. But then, yeah, our friend, Elia Kane just comes in and turns it all the way up to 11.
Yeah. Ken was like, "Oh, she's gonna turn it all the way up." I was like, "Oh
Yeah.
no!" But then it was really good to actually see. Do you think he's gonna come back? Do you think we're gonna see what happened there with Pushpen, or do you think that was kind of like a wrap for his story?
I think it's a rat. I think his name is Pershing, if I'm
Pershing.
remembering right.
What's his first
but,
name? I know it sounds.
It was something else with a P. Like
Sorry,
I want to say Pepe, but that's not it at all.
Dr. Pushpen.
Pen. I think it was Pen.
Pen. That's it.
Pen. Oh, but you're right. It might be
Pen
Pushing, actually, not Pershing.
Pen Pushing.
Pen Pushing, yeah. I don't know. I loved the character. I really love the actor. I think, in a little way, I was a bit disappointed by that because I kind of hope that the story of what's happening to the former Imperials gets treated in another thing. There's a couple of different Star Wars stories that were also supposed to happen that I believe were also going to take place at this time period that wound up they got canceled or, are going to get shifted around. And Kathleen Kennedy has said that some of the story ideas they had from that are going to get moved into other shows like Mandalorian. And I think that's part of what happened here. I think there was an idea that there was going to be a whole storyline about former Imperials in a different show. And so I hope that we get more of that story, either in Mando or in some other project that's coming. But I think this is the end for the Good Doctor. I think he's being pretty well and truly lobotomized.
Yeah. And as much as I want that story, I also don't want that during my Mandalorian season because
That's
it's
fair.
already so, the seasons are short. The episodes go from 30 minutes to 50 minutes. Like,
Yeah.
I don't want that in my, put it in Boba Fett.
Yeah. We'll see. I think it would have been better in its own thing. I think I'm excited to see how it will tie into Mandalorian because I'm sure that it will. But
It's going to be girl.
yeah, as much as I loved it, I felt it was a little like, how does this tie in? So we'll see. But I just loved it because to me it tied in so much to what they're doing in the rest of this whole universe of all these things are slowly happening to put the pieces together to finally justify how Palpatine comes back and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yep. I agree.
So, all right. Well, then we
get back.
Meanwhile, back in the cult cave, as you discussed it, the
Mandalorian
version-
cult cave.
the new version of the covert. So we get this great scene where Mando and Bo-Katan show up, and at first, Vizsla especially doesn't want them around, but they get proven to be, they were redeemed in the waters, and everyone's happy except for Vizsla. Glowers a little bit. I don't know how you can glower under a mask, but he's definitely glowering. What'd you think of that whole story?
I would loved it because I don't know. I just liked, again, they're under masks, so you can't see it. But like Bo-Katan was obviously physically, affected in a good way by being welcomed back into this new society, and she can leave whenever she wants to. But then everybody was like, patting her shoulders. Whereas when she had first gotten there, they were like, you're not real Mandalore. You get out of here.
Yeah.
So, it was a real flip within 15 minutes for her. But it seemed like she was kind of, responding to it positively.
It's interesting. I had a little bit of a different take. I think there's definitely a lot of that positivity of being welcomed, which again can be like, oh, all my other people abandoned me. Maybe this is like a cool thing. And also just like, hey, cool, more people I can recruit. It helps if they think I'm part of it. But I do think I commented in another place where I talked about this, that my history as a pastor who was often the more progressive Christian, who very conservative ones would be like, oh, you're not a real Christian because you haven't done this, this, or this. And who I often counseled people like that, I get a little squirrely at well, you technically did our ritual, so you're one of us now. Especially because the whole point is that they have a creed. And creed comes from the word credo, which is I believe. Like the whole point is that a creed is about what you believe. So the fact that they were like, well, you don't believe any of it, but technically you did it, so you're one of us, was a little like, you guys are have some hypocrisies here to work out. But I think you're right. I think she does appreciate it. I think she's
I thought
somewhat
if she like the whole time I thought she was going to take her helmet off in the middle of them saying all of it. So when she didn't, I was like, "Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Maybe she can hang here until she figures out what to do now that her mansion was blown up."
Yeah. I think she's definitely decided to go along with it. And I think you're right. There is some of it she really appreciates. And I mean, I like when I don't know where the story's going because I think you could show me a version of the story in which she becomes more of a more of like the Children of the Watch than anyone, which by the way, she was in the original Death Watch. So that isn't completely like, I think there's a lot about this that would appeal to her, especially after the Darksaber stuff didn't work. But I also could see it as her becoming very uncomfortable with it, and her and Mando maybe to some extent like connecting because they both feel uncomfortable with their own group's kind of dogma. And I like that we don't know. I like this really going to depend on what happens.
Yeah, I definitely don't feel like that's the place for either of them to like stay. But right now it works. But it's not gonna hold.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's true. Well, I think that's about all I would say. Any other last comments you have about this episode?
No, not really. I think we covered all of it. I did like it though, even if it got a little slow, but they picked it back up. It was cool to see the destroyers, however, in that whole like shipyard. That was cool.
Yep. Yeah, seeing that ship kind of getting picked apart, and I thought the train was fun. And as a person who, in a fairly delinquent youth, may have occasionally ridden on trains that I wasn't supposed to by strategically knowing when the conductors were going to be collecting tickets, I did have a lot of sympathy for that moment. And like when they were about to jump off the train, I was like, come on.
That was ridiculous.
What the fact that she timed it, that there was like, she knew a place where there were like some padding to jump onto. I was like, okay.
Low point.
Still hard to believe, but okay.
Sure.
Yeah. And it's why I like having you on here so much, because I think it's great to have the different perspectives. Because for me, this is absolutely my favorite episode of this season, probably in my top 3 episodes of all of Mandalorian. Like, I just thought it was so good. But I like that we get both, because I also think you're right. It is kind of a departure from the kind of cowboy samurai-ness of a lot of the Mando till this point. And I think it's... I like the idea that Star Wars is going to say, look, we just have this whole wide galaxy of questions and stories and characters to explore in the post-Empire days. And I want them to do that, but I also want there to have some cohesion, because, so we'll see. We'll see where it all goes.
We will see.
Well, Ashley, I'm so glad that I could get you on tonight, because I have the impression that you're doing a few other things these days. What is Ashley Coffin up to in the world of podcasting and videos and TikToks and all the rest?
Well, right now on Bill and Ashley's Terror Theater, we just covered Scream, and within probably the time that you're listening to this, we'll have dropped our review of Scream 6. We are still covering everything MCU over at the Marvel Cinematic Universe podcast, and yep, that's about it. And then
a lot of great stuff. Both of those are fantastic podcasts that you should definitely be checking out. All that can be found on strandedpanda.com, as well as just by following the show notes that we're going to put in the, along with all the comments we'll put in the show notes for this episode. Of course, this is an Ethical Panda. Of course, I am the Ethical Panda, and you can find all the podcasts I do by going to theethicalpanda.com. There you'll find all the stuff about this podcast. You'll also find about superhero ethics, where we will have, we just did an episode with Danielle and Aaron about The Last of Us, which we'll be putting up there. Definitely worth checking out. But most importantly, we'd love your feedback. What do you think? Is this a great new direction for Mandalorian? Do you want to be more spaceships and cowboys and laser fights? What do you want, and what do you think of this episode? Would love to hear your thoughts. All the ways to contact us you can find by going to theethicalpanda.com or looking in the show notes. I'm going to keep Ashley here for just a few more minutes, as we're going to do a bonus section for patrons, where we're actually going to talk a little bit about The Last of Us, because superhero ethics and Star Wars are just crossing over each other all the time. For everybody else, though, thank you so much for being a part of this. We have spoken.
Bye.
All right, Ashley, so we're just going to make a quick little bonus content here, because you are the horror fan extraordinaire in my life, and you have taught me so much about the horror genre. And I know that at the beginning of the show, The Last of Us, you were super excited about it and were really excited to come on and talk to me about it. And my understanding is that by the end of the show, you did not love it the way that you thought you would, and were a lot less interested in it than you thought you would. And, on that other podcast we just did about The Last of Us, one thing I talked about was how it subverted a lot of horror movie ideas and became much more of a dystopia than a horror movie. And so I'm curious for you, what was it about the show that kind of lost you?
Well, it's not that the show lost me and I didn't dislike it. I like the show for what it was, but it's just a regular show for me. It's nothing blowing my mind. It's not, a lot of people are, I didn't play the games, so I don't know the story that's coming, but I find that the story is pretty predictable. It's fun to watch, but the zombies are few and far between, and it's nothing I haven't seen before. Which is why I don't have a very emotional connection to the things that are happening, where other people seem to be acting like this is the most emotional show they've ever seen.
Right.
And I'm like, I've just been there, done that. I've watched so many shows. So, we
have
watch it.
Have you finished the show?
Yes.
Okay. You thought the whole thing with Joel and him making by the way, huge spoilers for the end of the show.
If you didn't watch it.
But you thought all that stuff about Joel turning and deciding just to rescue Ellie and blowing away all the fireflies and then him lying to her, that was all kind of predictable for you?
Yes, because you see that the second there's a switch in him after he picks her up from the House of Horrors, which is what I'm going to call it. You know, she was going to be horribly raped, maybe eaten. We don't know what was going to happen there. That guy wanted to make her his child bride. But there's a switch in Joel from that episode to the next, and how protective and how much he is obviously emulating that now this is his daughter figure, and he's going to protect her as much as he would protect Tommy. And we know that Joel is a killer. And that's honestly probably my favorite part about the show. The show is how brutal Joel is. And I know that makes me sound like a psycho, but I really loved that part when he took everybody out. And I'm like, in a post-apocalyptic world, if you are not Joel, you're dead. So that I love. And I love that Ellie is kind of the same way. They both are very much exactly the same person, which is why this whole father-daughter relationship thing seems to work for them, even though it does seem very new for Ellie. She seems like she's having a problem, opening up more to Joel, where Joel in that last episode was like, I'm your father figure now, trying to make her happy, trying to make her laugh. But yeah, I mean, I had an idea that they were going to have to probably kill her to get the cure, because I never really trust Marlene, even when I met her. But so to find out that there was that whole backstory where she's Ellie's mom's best friend makes it even, more terrible. But then when Joel killed her for it, I was totally for that. And then it's like, now we have to kill everybody who thinks that now they have to kill everybody who knows that Ellie is the cure to protect her. And I mean, it makes total sense. It doesn't help society at all. Yeah. But he sees her now as his little girl, my baby girl, and he's not going to let anybody hurt her. So yeah, it was kind of.
Yeah, that's fair. I was really blown away by it, but I agree with you that it's not. I mean, I think in part why I liked it as much as I did is it's not a zombie show. Like, there were very few zombies. It was much more the post-apocalypticness and like, what do we do? Because you're right. I kind of got to a place where I sort of felt like I totally understand Joel. I totally understand Marlene. I think the mistake both of them make is that they don't give Ellie any choice in the matter. And to me, where Joel really loses me is not even when he goes and kills all these people, it's when he lies to her about it.
Oh, because she'll probably choose to let them do it. And he can't handle that because he can't lose another daughter. Yeah,
no, I think that's true. And I think that's part of it, is that's the moment where I think you're right, seeing her get so close to all those terrible things happening to her under David with the church people. It's that moment where she becomes not her own person for him as much, but the thing I have to protect. And yeah, so I can totally get it why it's just not your thing. I think for me, one of the thoughts I had, especially as I watched Joel do this, was, oh, so this whole thing is a villain origin story. And I don't even mean that in that, like, we, the audience, are supposed to think he's a villain. But, like, think about all the villains we've been getting, especially in something like the MCU, where, like, they have a really good justification, but from the point of view of the hero, they're wrong. But actually, if you looked at it from their point of view, they're completely justified.
Yeah.
You know? And, like, and so to me, it was just, like, I really loved that they gave us that, like, yeah, there is no heroes in this world. There is no villains. Everyone's doing what they think they need to do. And we, the people outside that world, can sit back and judge it. But if you're in that world, who knows?
Yeah, that's why I can't even say he is a villain, because, you know, what if they go in there and they pull out her brain and it doesn't end up being the cure?
Yeah.
Then they just killed her.
And to be clear, I'm not saying that I think he's a villain from our objective standpoint. I'm thinking that, like, his story is what you would get a story a lot like his if the hero was the person who was, like, you know, you could have a story about a person who is told this, we almost cured this zombie. I want it to be vampires always. We almost cured this zombie thing, but this total terrible person stole the cure. You have to go find them and get the cure back. And then at the end, you realize that the cure is his daughter, you know, or that it's something like that. It's like, that's a Batman villain if I ever heard of one, you know? But
yeah. And it's like these shows, you know, we've seen so much of it. There's so many zombie shows and so many zombie movies that I've seen dozens and dozens. And it's just, I guess I thought I was going to see something new, but I've seen fungus zombies before. Like, it's not a brand new thing. And, I do appreciate, like, when I'm watching it, I can see the video game influences, especially in this last one, like her not putting the ladder down enough for him to get up, or all that other stuff, you know, her running away just so he can't catch her. I was like, this is very video game, which is really cool. So it's like, we're definitely going to keep watching the show. It's just not,
not what's grabbing you.
Yeah, it's not scary. It's not, you know, the drama, you know, for some people, this might be the most dramatic show they've ever seen. And I'm like, oh, you sweet summer child.
Fair. Yeah, I think it's just, I don't think it's even about, like, you know, more experience with the genre or whatever. I think it's just a very different way of looking at the genre.
Yeah.
But I do agree with you about the video game thing. Mary, my spouse, has played through the whole game, and she was watching it with me. And there were moments like when she doesn't put the ladder all the way down, or like when Joel is the sniper when all the zombies come up, and she was like, I hated this moment in the game.
Yeah.
Because those were all things that, like, in the game you had to be that sniper, and apparently it took like
in the
20
house
playthroughs in the house, but also in that time when they're almost caught by the people in Kansas City, but then the truck falls through and all the zombies come out, and, like, apparently in the game you have to be the sniper, like, watching Ellie picking off any zombies that get too close to her.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So yeah. Well, anyway, Ashley, thank you so much for being a part of this. Always good to have you on. To our patrons, thank you so much for supporting us. You're the ones who really make all this possible. And thank you and good night.
Bye.